Yeah, I started out Catholic. Now I'm going to a more non-denominational church now. I've been going to that for the last few years. I even got baptized there second time back in February. I was originally baptized Catholic when I was an infant, but then I got baptized again back in February so I can join this church. Okay, hello. My name is for the sake of this video or podcast, my bad. My name is Backert. I'm a born again Christian. I grew up Catholic since an early age. I went to I went to a Sunday school starting really when I was in kindergarten, and I never really finished Sunday school. I actually dropped down in about the third or fourth grade because I found it boring. I didn't really like it, but I did always believe though. I did always believe, and
Do you still believe those views that's held by Catholics, like the infallibility of the Pope and etc.
um,
Transubstantiation?
I guess I still do. Yes.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
What? Why? Why do you believe that in particular? Like, why would you believe that? Like a Pope? I mean, from my point of view, he's just a man. I mean, why would you believe that his words are infallible?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's 100% infallible. I mean, the Pope can still be wrong, and you can still disagree with the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
But but as a devout Christian, I believe in God and Christ, and I know real quick, in the Bible, Jesus told Peter, and there's a point to this. Jesus told Peter, Saint Peter, who is believed, of course, to be the first Pope. He told him that on you, there, on you, on this rock, the church shall be built. So it just seems that there's just this continuation throughout the years that there's this person who's kind of like the mascot of the church, almost the leader, who helps inspire us, and that he was just, hand selected by he was selected by God to lead the church and to lead the church and to try to modernize it and try to bring it towards the future and help bring in more believers over time and help spread the gospel. And yes, it's true that the Pope can be wrong sometimes. In fact, back in the medieval ages, we've had some pretty terrible popes.
Mm-hmm.
We've had some pretty corrupt popes that held some illegal parties. You know,
What about?
oh yes, we all love him. He's truly an example of what a saint should be, a true follower of Christ, right there.
Interesting.
Oh wow.
Well, so to be clear, so like if the Pope and the Bible disagree, you say the Bible takes precedence.
Of course.
Okay. Do you think the Bible is infallible?
Yes, I do.
You believe it's inerrant? Is inerrant as well?
It's a what?
Inerrant.
I'm
Like,
sorry. What?
well, inerrant. So like without error. Maybe. So when I say infallibility, I mean that everything in it is good for teaching.
Oh yeah.
There's another position called inerrancy that says there's no error in it. So like,
that's a good question. I want to say yes, even though I am aware that over the years there have been mistranslations, especially since the Bible, a lot of the scripture was originally written in Hebrew.
mm-hmm.
So it's in Hebrew and English are very different languages. Like there's words that describe emotions that exist in Hebrew but that don't exist in English. And so because of that, when mankind, how do I explain this? When mankind translated from Hebrew to English, there were a lot of like mistranslations. So like for example, I remember one time in one part of the Bible it says like some guy created 1,000 chariots, but then it says somewhere else in like the book of Chronicles, it says he made not 1,000, 100. So there are mistranslations like that, but that's just a mistranslation. So I would say that that it is without error the original scripture, but some of the English versions might seem like there's errors because of
How,
mistranslation.
how would you know this? The original manuscript doesn't have an error. It's not like we have any original manuscripts to examine. Why would you believe that?
Well, that's a good question. Well, I guess because I once talked. I remember one time at a Bible study, we were talking. It's been a while. It's been a few years, but I remember in one of my old Bible studies, we were talking about it, and we were talking about we were talking about we were we were talking about how like stuff like that happens, how it's hard to translate from Hebrew to English,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the guy had some experience, studying the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
and well, I guess he just explained that um uh oh dang, I'm at a loss for words here.
I guess. I guess like even I wonder what kind of explanation he could have given to affirm the inerrancy or infallibility of the original manuscripts. Because, like, according to my understanding, like no one has them. That no one has any original manuscript. We have early manuscripts, but not any original one. Not one that you could say that Paul. This is ink was blotted on there by Paul himself or anything like that. They're all copies, even our earliest manuscripts. So that's why I wonder. So since their original manuscripts are just not available for us to even examine, I don't know how we could confirm that they're inerrant. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand. I guess what I meant to say was that just the copies that we had,
Mm-hmm.
trying to translate them to English, there was mistranslations on the way.
Gotcha. So,
Yeah.
like, would you attribute like errors in it that you would just contribute all of those to mistranslations? Like, for instance, like I forget the exact passage, but where Jesus talks about the mustard seed. He says it's the least of all seeds, it's the smallest of all seeds, right? And we know that it's not the smallest of all seeds. Like, would you attribute that to a translation error?
Um,
Matthew 13.
Matthew 13. It's okay if I open it up real quick. Let's see if I can find it.
Matthew 13. What? Okay.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm using the New American Bible, like the NABRE. So I think it's like the revised edition of the NAB.
You said NAV.
No,
NAB. Okay. I'm gonna pull up that version. That way we're all on the same page. Yeah, that's where I'm at. Yeah, it says it is the smallest of all seeds in verse 32. And then it's not.
I wouldn't say that as an error. I think he just meant that figuratively. He wasn't like when he said that it was the smallest of seeds, he meant it figuratively, or he meant that in the way that maybe because remember he's not just speaking to us, he was also speaking to the apostles and the disciples at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
to them, a seed is the smallest seed. So we know today that there are seeds that are smaller. Which, by the way, what is the actual literal smallest seed?
Orchid.
An orchid?
Yeah, it's the smallest seed that I know is orchid.
Exactly. Currently, so probably during their time, to them, a mustard seed probably was the smallest seed to them, especially since back then they didn't really have.
So they dealt with poppy seeds as well, which was smaller. But even if they didn't, even if the ancient Israel they didn't know about seeds that were smaller than a mustard seed. Like Jesus being God, being omniscient, like you would think that he would know there's a seed that's smaller, right?
Well, yeah, he does know, but but see, that's the thing. If he said that, then the disciples, the apostles, would be like, "What?" They would be, their mind would be blown, and they wouldn't be able to understand. So he was trying to babyfy it. Not
Well,
only
but
that, but sorry.
go. I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Not only that, but a lot of people like me who don't know much about seeds, plants, and trees.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna like if you said, sorry, what did you say? What the smallest
Orchid.
an
Okay,
orchid?
you think like your mind would have been blown to realize that a mustard seed isn't the smallest?
Well, my mind
I
probably
mean,
wouldn't be blown like here in the 21st
if I were to
century.
wake up tomorrow and somebody would have say they found a seed that's smaller than the orchid, I mean, it wouldn't like it wouldn't rip apart my worldview. I was, I talking well, yeah, sure. But let's grant that he's talking about plants here. So like even so the poppy seeds, right? So they definitely knew about poppy seeds, right? And so to me, for Jesus to add this, right, to say this is the smallest seed, like I thought it was, to me, it just seems superfluous, right? Because he could just say that a mustard seed is small, right? He says no, it's of the smallest seeds, and his point would have still stood, right? It seemed like him making the statement that that is wrong. It's especially him being God, knowing that it's wrong. I didn't see it. I don't see a need for him to say this. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're
Yeah.
saying. I guess he. Oh no, no, you go. No, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Sure thing. One second. Let me close my door. So real quick, yeah, I'm open to cross-examination and questioning, and in fact, it's part of my faith to question more because I feel like it's a good thing to question because it shows that your faith is it shows that your faith is real, that you really take it seriously. It's good to question. It's good to have doubt because it just shows that because usually when you doubt, that means that you try to look at what you doubt, and then when you do, you try to find you try to find an explanation for why that is, and it usually helps increase my faith. And that's what I found with myself. Anytime I have doubt about something, I usually, look through the Bible, try to find an answer why things are why they are, and then eventually it clicks to me, and then it's like, oh, it just makes sense, if that makes any sense. But anyway, so I guess part of the I guess part of the reason is because I guess part of the reason well, I guess there's a few reasons why that's the case. Well, first of all, one, like you're first of one, it's just what I grew up with. One, it's just that what I grew up with, it's what I know more, what I'm more comfortable with. And two, I've also done some outside research, outside of the Bible, because yes, I know that you can't just use one piece as like evidence or something like that. But yeah, I've looked at, like the three monotheistic religions before, like Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And what I just found, just looking at all three religions, I just felt like Christianity just made the most sense. I felt like, it made sense because with just Judaism, it's like, great, God started all these covenants with Abraham, but it feels like it's like missing a second half. It feels like you're still waiting for that Messiah. And then with Islam, the problem I have with the Quran and Islam is that, real quick, the Muslim belief starts with where did he go?
I'm still here.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
fixing the laptop.
I was like, he disappeared. It's a miracle. He ascended.
Yeah. Raptured.
He got raptured. But yeah, the one problem I have with the Quran is that their belief really starts with God or Allah giving the blessing to the Muslims believe that God gave the blessing to Abraham's first son Ishmael,
Mm-hmm.
but but according to the book of Genesis here in the Christian Bible and the Jewish Bible, it says that it goes to Isaac. And most
Why care what the Christian Bible says? Because you're saying you're rejecting Islam, right? Because they believe what the anointed one, the God's chosen, was Ishmael, right? Because typically the one that receives the inheritance is the oldest son, right? But for some reason God chose Isaac, and you accept that because the Bible says it. I'm saying, why give any credence to the Bible? Yeah, why not the Quran?
Well, that's a good point. That's a good question. I guess I just like the message more. I just feel like it's more real and that it relates to me. I just
Is that a good reason to believe something now?
well, I think so. I mean, I
To
think
like
it is.
to believe something, like believe a claim just because you like it more, or it relates to you more.
Um,
Like, yeah, right.
correct. Oh no, absolutely no. Oh well, it's not necessarily ignore it. I mean, I looked at the other religions, and I just felt like they just weren't real. They just
What did
well, that's a good question, and I think there's probably many reasons for that.
best one? What's the best
Probably
one
the
you got?
probably just the best one when it all comes down to it is familiarity. I just grew up with it, and I just grew up with it, and just like I just grew up with it, and I'm more familiar with it.
But it's again, is that a good reason to believe something because it's familiar?
Not exactly. No, there obviously needs to be more to that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, but by your token, you should be Catholic, right? Because that's most familiar to you, right? I'm sorry, go ahead,
Yes.
Facade.
That's a good question. I guess I would say no, because you know, that's just not the truth. That does not exist in the universe. And yes, it is important to me. Yes, I want to know things that are true. Yes, that is correct. Oh, yes, of course. Um, no.
Apply this. That should fix it. Yes, that fixed it.
Whoa, they said this whole time they couldn't hear you.
They said it cut out. I don't know when, but I have a
Okay,
mild echo now.
okay.
Just gonna turn the reflection of my audio off. Hopefully that's not echoing too bad for you guys. If you can let me know if it's echoing, I'll try to fix it.
Okay.
How many people are watching?
That's that's gonna get loud.
Oh, sorry.
Nope, my bad. That's my fault. I'm messing with the audio real quick. There's a couple of real people live currently, so apologize for that. AAA, if you don't mind continuing the conversation while I mess around with the audio.
Okay. Okay. Sure.
I think you
Uh.
just pick up where I left off.
Yeah. So, question. So right now, like, what your current beliefs, like, if you were given evidence to the contrary, would you stop believing it? Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah. Oh no.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I can hear you.
Okay.
So I was just smiling because that's a really tough question. Because my faith has just been a good part of my life for so long that, and it's just hard to explain. I just, there have been times where I have doubted God, but each and every time it's all come back to I believe He's real, because I just come back to like how not believing would just usually it just leads me down a dark path, and
Mm-hmm.
usually messes up my moral compass. Like I start to abandon some of the teachings that the Bible teaches, like love your neighbor, and then I just turn into like this mean person, and I just lose like almost the ability of self-control and to control myself. And then it kind of just gets me upset, like if there really
What
wasn't
about false prophecy? Like, what if I were to show you a prophecy that island nation off the Phoenician coast, right? And so Tyre, he's a wicked king. The king of Tyre, he's a wicked king. And so God's like, I'm going to punish you. I'm going to send Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and he's going to completely destroy the city. He's going to crush all the towers. He can destroy all the buildings, the walls. They're going to be trampled down. It's going to be flat. And it's not going to be good for anything but drying fishing nets. That's what it says. Chapter 26. Right?
Oh, hold on. Almost there to 26. I just made it to Ezekiel. Sorry.
Okay. But yeah, so it says he's pretty much just going to Nebuchadnezzar is going to go in there and it's going to level the city. This is what God is saying according to Ezekiel.
Quick audio
That
test while you do that.
okay. That didn't happen. We know historically that didn't happen. So Nebuchadnezzar laid a 10-year siege on that city. He was never able to do that. He failed. Right? He couldn't invade the city. And what's ironic is that chapter 29 acknowledges this failed prophecy. Ezekiel, he says that it goes in chapter 29. It talks about that. It says God is like, my bad. You know what? You went and you fought against the king of Tyre. You tried really hard. You did it for me. You had no reward. My bad. So instead, because you fought for me and you tried really hard, I'm going to give you Egypt. That's what he's telling Nebuchadnezzar. Historically, that didn't happen either. So Nebuchadnezzar was never able to annex Egypt. So just two failed prophecies. And what's ironic is that chapter 29 acknowledges the failure of 26.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is one of those I wanted to go to in one of the previous conversations we've had, but we haven't had a chance. So appreciate you bringing it up.
Do you still believe the Bible is infallible?
Well, I gotta study this more.
Okay, yeah, check it out. So there's been a few attempts to try to rectify this. For one, they try to say that that the prophecy wasn't about Nebuchadnezzar; it was about Alexander the Great. Problem with that is that Ezekiel 26 mentions Nebuchadnezzar by name. It says Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, right? Not Alexander the Great, general of Greece, right? That's not. And Alexander the Great didn't come around till 400 years later, and not even he did what's described in Ezekiel 26. And if the prophecy was about Alexander the Great, why try to why write chapter 29 talking about how Nebuchadnezzar wasn't actually able to conquer the city, right? Because it wasn't about him in the first place. So the explanation doesn't really make any sense. And then the another explanation for it, a lot of your reformers, they try to say that the prophecy is actually about Jesus in the second coming, that he's when he comes and destroys the whole earth, he's going to destroy Tyre as well. That doesn't really make any sense, really, for the same reasons as why it couldn't be Alexander the Great. What's the point in writing chapter 29, right? Because the prophecy, if the prophecy wasn't about Nebuchadnezzar in the first place, why are you giving him Egypt, right? Because it doesn't really make any sense. And I haven't seen any attempts to explain chapter 29 when it says that God's going to give Egypt. That didn't happen. Total failure. I'll tell you this. Here, remember, here's a homework assignment. Look at the Gospels from the from when Jesus is first betrayed to his last day on earth. I want you to try to figure out if you can come up with one coherent timeline that matches all four Gospels. It's an impossible task. Like there's contradictions all throughout. Like the temple veil being ripped. One passage says it happened before Jesus died. One says it's after. Like, what did Judas do after he betrayed Jesus?
That's a great question, and I looked that up. So I know the Gospels originally said that he hung himself, but then in Acts it says he threw himself off a cliff that he bought with the money that he got from the Pharisees. Even though the problem is that I know
he threw the money back at the Pharisees.
Yeah, he threw the money back.
Yeah, but how did he use it to buy land if he gave the money back?
Well, probably because there could be many explanations. It could be he threw the money back, and then the Pharisees just gave it back to him, so he just took it and bought some land that he tried to commit suicide with. So he probably hung himself over a cliff, and then the rope broke, and then he fell down into the cliff.
You don't think that's a little post hoc, right? Because like the pastor says that he threw the money back and then went out and hung himself, right? And so this explanation that he threw the money back and then as he's leaving, the Pharisees is like, no, take this money, right? That there's no justification for that in the text. The only reason you're even appealing to that is to rectify these two stories that contradict each other, right?
I'm sorry, ask that question again. Sorry.
So what I'm saying is, like, is there any textual justification to think that the Pharisees gave the money back to Judas other than trying to fix the contradiction in the two accounts? Like, because it says he threw the money at their feet and then went out and hung himself. Like, taking the money, buying land, right? I mean, this isn't something that's gonna be like done like that, right? This is some time, but like the way it's presented in the text is that like this he is full of I guess he's depressed, he's full of sadness, sorrow about what he did to Jesus. So he throws some money at his feet and then he goes out and hang himself. right? And now we're saying, I guess, was quite a bit of time. He went out and purchased some property first. You know, it just, I don't see a reason to say that the Pharisees like caught up to him and gave him the money back.
Well, maybe it's not that they necessarily caught up to him. Maybe he just threw the money at him, and then the Pharisees were like, "No, no, we paid you, take it." So then, as soon as Judas threw the money back, the Pharisees immediately threw it back at him, saying, "No, just take it, it's yours." And then he ran. Or who knows? Maybe he didn't throw all of it. Maybe he threw only some of it, and he still had, like, maybe he thought he threw all of it, but he realized he still like had some in his pocket or something.
Okay. All right. What about the zombies? You believe in that?
Are you talking about like the resurrection of the dead and
Yeah.
Revelations?
No. I'm talking about no. I'm talking about after the death of Jesus, right? It says that the graves open and saints that were holy came out of it and walked into Jerusalem.
I thought it just said the tombs open and the bodies just came up. They didn't like walk. They just
they went into Jerusalem. A lot of people saw it. That's what it says. Let me find the exact passage.
I think we're working again. I may sound a little weird to people that are watching live, but I think we're back to where we should be. I think I accidentally plugged my mic at some point, and it reset what mic it was going to go to and all that fun stuff. But I think we're working again. I apologize for that.
Gotcha. So it's in Matthew 27:53. It says they came out of the tombs and they entered the holy city and appeared to many. Like, do you believe that happened? I basically a lot of people object to my usage of the word zombies. I mean, but my book, that's a zombie. A book. I mean, a tomb comes open and a body jumps out and starts preaching the gospel at me. That's a zombie.
You say 27:23?
Let me see. 27.
It's 53.
53.
Okay, 53. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
No, now I skipped. Well, I don't see why not. If God can create the universe and everything, He can. I mean, obviously, if you believe in Jesus, you believe in like the resurrection of the dead. So yeah.
What do you think? Like, there to be some other account of this, like some sort of like this would be huge, right? Like if I live in the DC area, right? And if tombs started opening and coming into the city, right? There'd be so many accounts of this, right?
Yeah,
I mean, like the only places this is mentioned is in Matthew.
And just to put things in mild perspective, according to most historic sources, the population of the generic area at the time probably exceeded 100,000 people. So you're talking about potentially upwards of 100,000 people witnessing this event in the area. Depending on how widespread the graves opened, obviously, it doesn't really specify the area in which it happened.
But how about like scientific inaccuracies? Right. So like, what about that? So I wouldn't even call this an inaccuracy, right? So like, Noah's flood. You're familiar with that, right?
Yes, I am.
All right. So the flood, it covered the entire earth, even the highest mountain, right? So there aren't enough water molecules on the planet for a flood that large. Like, there's not enough water, is what I'm saying. And then have you seen the explanation of where the water went after the flood happened? Right? Because we gotta figure out where this water came from in the first place, and then where did it go afterwards? And the explanation in the text, it just leaves you wanting, right? So it's in Genesis 8. It says, "But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and livestock that were with him in the ark. He set a wind over the earth, and the waters receded." So like a wind blew the waters, like blew it where? Like in the outer space, right? There's it's not like you can take water, stack it in one place. Therefore, man, you can have like land, right? There's where did the water go? Like, I mean, I don't want to go through like every single error in the scripture. Like, but we could be here all night. But like, this is just like just a few of them. Like it's
I mean,
this.
like the flood is a particularly, and I'll use the biblical term, damning story for many reasons.
Yeah, a
I
lot.
mean, obviously, the animal population and what happens thereafter, the plant life on Earth would be completely eradicated, with exception of, probably not even without exception, but maybe with exception of a very few sea kelp, which are capable of surviving in water that has got salt in it. Because, as you can imagine, if the whole Earth is covered in water, given that the majority of water on Earth is salt water, all plants would be covered in salt water, which would kill them within a day or two for the same reason it would kill you for being covered in water for a day or two, as you die without oxygen. And plants actually breathe just like you do, just a little differently. They don't have lungs, but if you
They have
submerge them in water,
photosynthesis. Yes,
yeah,
they inhale the. Yeah, sorry, keep going.
yeah. So I mean, essentially, 2 or 3 days underwater will kill just about any plant there is. There are a few exceptions, algae and sea kelps, but without those, if you submerge pretty much every other plant on the surface of Earth underwater for the period of approximately 120 days, probably excess of that by the time you count in the fact that you talk about how long it takes to dry the Earth back out. You're talking about coming back to a desolate wasteland with, at best, 2 of every animal, and then repopulating the entire
What are
Earth
you,
in the last
what are they
4,000
going to eat?
years.
How about what are they going to eat? Right? Noah lets the animals off the ark. Lion's hungry. He eats a zebra. Right? No more zebras. Right? So like there's tons of problems. Like the doesn't matter that is not only are there contradictions within the text, but there are also things in the text that contradict our direct observations.
And obviously, just direct, clear understanding of how life works. Like, we
Yeah.
know that 2 of every animal couldn't populate to some of the populations that we have on Earth. I mean, there are 8 billion humans, but there are about 16 billion species of beetles. That's a lot.
That's a lot of beetles.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a lot of beetles in a very short amount of time. And assuming they were on the Ark, because doesn't tend to mention insects too often in the Bible. But I mean, we just have a lot of problems that are found within some of the stories mentioned. And if you take them as a way to impart knowledge and to pass on information and to warn people about potential problems and crises, as many ancient historic texts did, like for instance the Epic of Gilgamesh, which also mentions flooding, or ancient Mesopotamian texts that talk about floods and crop preservation, which is the whole purpose, is to build up stores for when if you lose everything, that you can continue living. Then you have a really cool book that tells you some really awesome stories that also impart some knowledge to people about how to live through terrible conditions. But if you take it as a spiritual book, if you take it as a book that's intended to be read literally, you have some, at best, circumstantial situations that just defied logic and science. And to go from there to say, I mean, God could do it. mean, I guess my question would be like, A, what's the evidence that God was involved at all, or that, for instance, the story of the flood ever happened? We don't have any good example of it. But then B, like, if that is a real thing and there's a God that caused this flood, why is that someone that you'd want to be involved with? Because that's a terrible thing. Like, like everybody that was alive, with the exception of, if you believe the story, Noah and his sons and their wives, and that's about 8 people, died. That would include innocent children, women, people that had no idea they were offending the God that you supposedly worship. People that have never heard of the God that you supposedly worship, and that couldn't have known, because most people were illiterate, they couldn't read, writing probably was at the forefront of existence, so reading was definitely not on the agenda. And you have a 900-year-old man assigned to build a boat to save the whole world's population of animals.
I think he's only about 600 when he's building a boat to
When
be.
he died.
Man,
May.
may
I think Adam was
he was
like
over.
936 or something, right?
Adam was 939. Methuselah was 930. Yeah, Methuselah was 969. Yeah. So to be fair, Noah was like only in his 600s, so he was still a pretty young dude
Apologies.
at the
I
time.
didn't mean to.
Yeah. But yeah, what are your thoughts though, Backer?
That's a great question. So there are many different explanations to this. One could be that there's a good chance that Noah might not have been a real person, and that God just put that in there, and the authors of the Bible put that in there just for symbolism, to try to show, just for symbolism.
Let's tackle that. So
Okay, let's not go there. Okay.
Yeah, you think it's possible that the Noah account like isn't real, like it's right. So you understand that Noah is mentioned in Jesus's genealogy?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so to render Noah as like urban legend, it becomes problematic because he's mentioned as a historical figure who's along his lineage becomes Jesus, right? You don't believe Jesus is myth, right?
Correct.
Okay, so do you see a problem?
Oh, yes, I do. That's why I was going to say, well, that's just one explanation that some people accept.
Okay.
Another one could be, I guess the other one would just be, how do I explain this? That like, for example, yes, I know, winds don't just take away water, for example, like you were mentioning earlier. Obviously, that happens through the process of evaporation. So maybe what happened was that God just evaporated the water.
Not enough water. Where do you think the water came from?
Well, obviously,
Currently there is not enough water molecules for a global flood.
Well, I guess maybe God just, since God is the ultimate creator, he just created some extra water molecules for the time, and it just came down. And then when it was no longer needed, he just did away with it. And yes, I know that. And yes, I know that goes against, like basic science. But let's not forget that God's the one who created it. So if he wants to, just.
I feel like anybody could use this explanation for any sort of belief, right? So, like whatever their religion is, and they have a story, and it contradicts direct observations. You could just say, "Well, God," or "Well, magic." I don't see why you couldn't use this. Yeah, right.
Wizards.
Couldn't anyone?
Thomas in the comments said it's possible that the account is metaphorical, allegorical when referring to the account of Noah, and this is something that I postulate as a possibility as a not necessarily a biblical text, but as a historic text and a historic document, that it's meant to pass down knowledge and wisdom to the people, which I'm perfectly fine with. I think the Epic of Gilgamesh is another good example. I think there's some excellent Mesopotamian. There's also some really, really interesting Central American texts that do similar things that mention things like large floods. And if that's all you want to take it for, I'm on board. But the minute you start to justify this by saying that, like, maybe God just created extra water and we still don't have a good reason to believe the Bible is real, in my opinion, then, like, why can't the Muslims do the same thing for any proclamations in the Quran? Why can't the Hindus do anything with their proclamations about Krishna? Why can't the Jews do anything about the proclamations in the Tanakh? You know, like, I know Pastafarianism is kind of a joke, but, like, people that believe the flying spaghetti monster, why can't they also point to their deity as an out? Because if we don't have an explanation and we say, therefore, unknown supernatural deity, depending on what name you want to call it, then we can do that with any religion. And that kind of goes back to my initial questioning about, like, Santa. Don't we want to believe the truth, or do we want to believe what feels good, or what we're familiar with?
Ooh.
What are your thoughts, Beckett? Hey, I got a question for you. So, like, what could I show you to convince you that it isn't true? Like, just Christianity in general.
That's a good question, and I guess the only thing that could, I'm sorry, guys, I guess really the only thing, I've had a faith and relationship with God for so long that I guess the only thing that can really convince me is if, like, I die and have a near life death experience, and I see nothing. I just start to black out, and I start to, like, forget everything, and I just fade away into nothingness.
Really? So we could show you failed prophecies. Like, I could put you in a time machine, all right, and then we go back into the past.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. If you took me to a time machine and you took me back then, and, like, some of this stuff that was, like, written, like, ended up not happening or whatever, then yeah. Like, I mean, yeah. If you took me to a time machine.
What about the failed prophecies? Ezekiel 26. I mean, perhaps you need more time to investigate and read that for yourself. But, like, I mean, what are your thoughts? So, like, if it turns out that I described it accurately, that what I said is exactly how it is, right? Would that impact your faith at all?
Maybe I would just have time to, like, read and study and discern it.
And if you read and studied and discerned it, and you found out this was actually, in fact, a failed prophecy, what would you do with that? Like, are you still believe in it?
I would probably first have a nervous breakdown, and then I would have to see what happened after that.
Okay.
So,
I mean,
I don't
fair
want
enough.
to deter or demean what you were saying about near-death experiences, but I would like to point out a really interesting study that among 40 volunteers who are going to have incredibly invasive surgeries and potentially risk death, there was no indication of increased chance of having a near-death experience, whether you were religious or not. And then on a much larger scale, across the globe, it seems to be, according to most reports, near-death experiences often reflect on the religion and the geographic location of the predominant religion and the area in which the near-death experience occurs. So, for instance, typically in the biblical Bible Belt of the American South, people tend to have experiences that reflect what they would describe as heaven. So they might see, like, a person dressed in white and streets of gold and that kind of thing because they're familiar with how heaven is described in the Bible. However, if you look at places like India and Southeast Asia, where there's Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims, they have much different experiences, but it's their own version of whatever that is. So it kind of seems that near-death experiences are kind of guided by your mind to the extent of your brain is probably shutting off, but you're going to what you might hope is thereafter. And that seems to be the case, and it seems to also line up with the predominant religion in your area. So, I wouldn't put my eggs in a basket on a brain that's dying. That's all I'm saying. And that's just my 2 cents on it. But while we're at it, Thomas commented again. Lots of early theologians, philosophers, early church fathers, Hesychrists, Cappadocian, I think I pronounced that right, fathers, etc., interpreted the scripture by analogy and metaphor. Why so many modern atheists and atheists, for that matter, interpret it so literally is confusing. A literal interpretation, in my humble opinion, is naive interpretation. And then they commented, some NDEs, which is near-death experiences, transcend culture, society, and time, and occur within. Not all NDEs are socially influenced. I agree, not all NDEs are socially influenced. There have been many cases where people describe things that they couldn't particularly describe in their own culture or society. Again, pointing to a brain that is shutting down is not really a particularly convincing argument, in my opinion, because people describe many things on brains that are being manipulated by hypoxia and or things like LSD, even when they're not experiencing near-death experiences. They experience things that they can't describe or can't explain. They can have full conversations with creatures that don't exist. So it's just not a particularly compelling argument, in my opinion. But if you'd like to have a discussion on it, Thomas, I'd love to have you on. We can talk about it. It's a pretty interesting topic that I've had with a conversation with recently with one of my coworkers. So, back to kind of what we were talking about, and I know we've kind of thrown a lot at you, is like, I think the ultimate question and the ultimate like crux of the conversation is something I was hitting at earlier. That you say you want to pursue truth and you want to believe things that are true and that truth matters to you. And I would say, and I mean, I don't particularly like speaking on Triple A's behalf, but I mean, he and I have known each other for a very long time, and I can say with confidence that he and I both value truth, and that he and I both seek truth, and we want to know the truth. And I think, at least in part due to our search for truth, our genuine search for truth, is the reason that we're in the seats that we're in today. Because we analyzed the evidence and we found it wanting. And so it's I guess my question is, if you took a step back and you genuinely tried to analyze the evidence, do you think it would be sufficient to convince someone else? Because if you think it's convincing to someone else, then you probably could believe it yourself, right? But if you're unconvinced, if you're not capable of, persuading, I guess, or convincing someone of the facts, then maybe that's a good indication that you should re-examine them yourself. If you're in front of a court and you're a lawyer making a defense for the case of Christianity, do you think you could convince the jury of 12 that you have a good enough reason to believe it? And then I'm sure you could reach out to AAA, you could reach out to me, you could look online. There's an infinite number of debates and discussions and papers and everything else that go into detailed arguments on the other side of it. So you could say the prosecutor in the case, or the atheist, or the Muslims, or anyone else that doesn't believe exactly what you believe, and kind of puts you in that ring. And your question at the end of the day is what I believe convincing enough to go into a courtroom and convince a jury of 12 that you're right beyond reasonable doubt?
Well, that's a really good question. Well, one thing's for certain is that I'm definitely not a trained theologian, and I'm definitely bad at this. I'm not too sure if I personally could be able to go there and try to convince them. It's never really much of a. I'm not too sure.
So, I mean, like, can I be really frank and blunt?
Yeah, just be frank.
Yeah, why keep believing something if you aren't sure? Or why keep believing if you're unable or incapable of defending or convincing other people that it's what you believe is true? Why keep hoping that Santa Claus stops by and brings you toys when you know it's typically your parents or guardians that are the ones doing the work? Why hold on to something that you may not truly believe is a good reason to hold faith into something because of tradition or of familiarity? Is it because you're worried that without it there's problems that you're going to have or answers to questions that you don't know the answer to? Or is it because you don't have a good reason to just not believe, but you're not quite willing to ignore it for the sake of truth?
Um, I guess it's probably more the first one, maybe.
So, I mean, if have you ever heard of a website called Recovering from Religion? It was set up initially because of the Mormon faith and how tyrannical they are about controlling every aspect of Mormon life. And when Mormons leave their faith, they often leave their family, their friends, they're kicked out of their houses, they're not allowed to speak to their former colleagues, they're not allowed to speak to their family anymore. And it was originally set up to kind of help them overcome this religion that they were into, and then they got out of it. And this by no means, like, I by no means say that, like, you should just abandon all your beliefs and all that fun stuff. It seems that you're kind of believing them because it's been told to you, not because you have good reason to. And it sounds to me, you're a smart guy, I can tell by the conversation that we've had, that you have questions that you don't really have the answer to in religion. So it's not like you're going to be left in the dark if you abandon religion and you just have questions. To me, questions are a beautiful thing. They're wonderful. I love asking questions. I love having questions answered, because that means that information isn't quite complete. The minute you think you know everything, or the minute you have an answer that can solve everything, and in case of religion, that's often a god, you tend to kind of shift burden. And that's not something you get to do when there's no God to shift the burden to, right? So you just have to ask the question. And it's okay to have the question. It's kind of fun to have the question, to say, like, oh, well, what do I do about this scenario? And the answer ultimately is going to reside in yourself, because there's no scapegoat of Christianity or Jesus or God or Allah to take the blame for you if you screw up. But I can only encourage you to continue looking for genuine truth. And if you feel like you're at a place now where that's not happening, I mean, that's, to me, is a good reason to really consider your own beliefs and start asking yourself questions about what you believe and why. And if you're willing to do that, I highly encourage it. And I would recommend trying to answer those questions as honestly with yourself as possible, but also recognize that A, you're not the only person in that position. B, you don't have to abandon everything and give up on everything and forget everything you've ever known. You're not going to be lost in the woods, and you're not going to be drawn into the raptures of hell the second you say, I'm not sure I believe in God anymore. Or at least that didn't happen to me or AAA, and both of us were devout Christians. So at least consider, and maybe go back and think about some of the questions we had, and try to come up with your own answers. And by the way, like, you can take as much time as you want to do it. It's not like we're forcing you. This is obviously a live debate, but you can go back and read Ezekiel 26 if that's something that's interested you. You can go read Ezekiel 29. You can go read about the history of the Quran and its compilation, or the history of the Bible and its compilation, and get answers to these questions, because there's a lot of information out there. And at the end of it all, if you end up being satisfied with what you're holding on to as truth, by all means, stick to it. But to me, it kind of seems like you have an intrigued enough brain and a curious enough brain to genuinely get out there and seek the truth. And I think if you started doing that and you started seeing the, not necessarily problems, but just kind of the missteps that happen and the similarities, so you're going to be baffled by some of the similarities in current religion and religions past, that talk about very similar aspects and concepts that are just fascinating. The Epic of Gilgamesh actually has the story of Noah almost just identical, and it preceded the Bible by a couple hundred years. It's really fascinating. You should read the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's great. It's a really cool epic. And the only difference is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, they included one more thing, and this is how you knew it was a story about preparing yourself for the future, is they didn't just put animals and food on the boat, they put their riches and gold, because they would need it in the future, and that's how they measured wealth. So I thought that was a pretty interesting little detail that the Bible kind of left out. But, I mean, do you have questions for us? Is there a particular thing that you wanted us to answer before we wrap things up? Because I think at this point, we're at the point where you have questions maybe of yourself, and I have questions for us. And if not, then I think we can wrap it up.
What'd you say the name of that website was again?
It's called Recovering from Religion. If you'd like, I can link it in our chat, and I can post it in the chat that we're having. I can post it in the YouTube chat.
No need. I have it written down here. Thank you.
So recoveringfromreligion.org.
Oh, .org, yeah.
Yep. And it's a organization. It's completely free. It doesn't specify what religion they're talking about. It's just like I said, it was originally designed for people that were in the Mormon faith that were leaving it because they were quite literally being kicked out of their houses. So it was pretty interesting. And it's all non-religious, and it kind of just goes to show that humans can have decency even against people that are being oppressed by things like religion. So any other questions for us, or any other questions you had on anything that we talked about?
No, except thank you for this discussion. I had a wonderful time, even if, well, let's be honest, I kind of lost big time.
Nah, man, I think everybody won, man. Do it I enjoyed the conversation. We don't look at this as like win lose type of deals. Like if you see some of our other episodes, like they get heated, but like when we never see them as win lose. You know, we just want to have honest conversation. That's really it.
Honestly, I just appreciate the openness and the honestness, and if you don't know, don't, you say I don't know. I'd rather you do that than say that you have all the answers, or if one of us pin you on a corner and we clearly have something on you and you just refuse to give it up for no reason. Honestly, I prefer your method of, let me examine this, let me think about it, maybe come back to you with an answer. I'd rather you do that all day. And hopefully it was enlightening to you. It's always enlightening to us. We can kind of use our experience and history to kind of delve into this a little more and answer questions that you may have, or get to chat with you and have a good conversation, which is something that the whole show is based around. So it's not like a win-lose thing here. Any other questions or anything else you had for us?
Well, wanted to give you last word. Anything
typically
you want to
last word of the show? So if you have anything you'd like to plug, a website, a YouTube channel,
book, whatever.
Book,
oh yeah, sure.
like that, it's all yours, and then we'll wrap it up and end the show.
Yeah. I actually make music using artificial intelligence. My artist's name is just the same as my name, Alexander Backert. You can look me up on YouTube or Spotify, Amazon Music.
Text me the link. I'll add it in the description in the video.
Yeah, I'll just
Yep.
add your
Oh
link.
yeah.
You can pin it as a comment as well.
Yep.
Let me see if I can find it.
Doesn't have to be immediate.
Be now. Yeah, like
Oh, okay.
yeah, just send it to me and I'll throw it in there.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So, anything else you wanted to plug, or anything else you wanted to say as a wrap up?
This is a great experience. It was a wonderful time, and if there's anyone out there watching and you're interested in joining and talking about whatever, I highly encourage it. This is a very friendly environment, very open. The questions were much harder than I anticipated. It's really going to challenge you. So if you're someone who likes a challenge, this place is for you. So, anyone's welcome. And me, even though I'm real quick, and though I might be a deeply religious person, I'm not really like a theologian or a preacher, but yet I came up here to try to defend my beliefs. So it doesn't matter, yeah, what your experience is. Doesn't matter what your experience, what your education is. You can come up here and talk about whatever. Even though I will warn you this though, try to prepare if you're going to do this or any debate. Try to prepare more, because I'm going to be honest, I didn't really do much preparing. I just kind of came up thinking that this was going to be like a generic philosophy. And then I got hit with all these. I'm like, oh man. I feel like a blind dude.
So, yeah, we have a bit of experience with the previous guest, and of course, just conversations amongst each other. But yeah, I mean, you did great, man. I guess I really appreciate it. Really glad you came on. And as Triple A was saying earlier, might like to get you back on talk about things politically, not just spiritually in the future. But I really appreciate you joining us. Thank you guys for watching. This episode will be up. Obviously, it's live today. We'll put up a new one either Friday or Saturday, one of our shorts, and we'll see you guys soon.